Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
He has the serpent tongue, the cloven tongue. A victim's brother addressed a South Carolina court in 2015 before turning to his brother's killer. "You are a devil, man." Irate, heartbroken, and shaken with anger, Antoine James then stormed out of the courtroom, leaving behind the man who'd just been found guilty of murdering one of the closest and most important people in Antoine's life. This was the climactic end to a case that started all the way back in November of 2013 when a man went missing. A group of children playing in the woods in Lancaster, South Carolina, about a month after the man's disappearance, made a disturbing and grotesque discovery. Partially hidden by brush and leaves was the decomposing remains of a man in his 30s. His head had been nearly hacked away from his body. Scared, the children ran home to tell their parents what they'd found, and the police were called to the scene shortly after. The investigators then discovered what was left of 33-year-old Ricky James, the very same man who'd gone missing about a month prior. Ricky had most definitely been murdered. He'd been bound with rope wrapped around him all the way from his neck to his ankles, his neck slashed, and his body then left exposed to the mercy of the elements. His death had been the result of 39 stab wounds that had come from a butcher knife. The area of the woods that he was found in showed no signs of a struggle or looked like Ricky had been taken there against his will. But that was the fact of the case that was maybe the only unsurprising part of the story for Ricky's family and friends. Ricky was known to drink, and when he drank, he became more trusting and open to the people around him, no matter who they were or appeared to be. It looked like, unfortunately for everyone involved, that Ricky had put his faith in the wrong people. While the investigators waited on forensic evidence to back up their suspicions, they turned their attention to their main suspect. Usually in a case like this, where Ricky was known to talk to almost anyone, the list of suspects would be quite extensive. But this time around, the investigators had only one potential name in mind. Within sight of the body was a house, and in that house lived 24-year-old David Adam Pate. Even at 24, David had an extensive rap sheet and a long history with the system, but he also had ties to local gangs and prison hate groups. With a black man now turning up murdered just yards from David's home, the investigators couldn't help but wonder just how much he was involved. Talking to David looked like the next logical step for the investigators to take, but they took their time in approaching him. Ricky's story turned into one of those rare cases where the authorities had eyes and ears on their main suspect right from the get-go, and everyone could sleep at night, safe in the knowledge that David wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. David was already in jail. He'd been picked up only 2 weeks before the gruesome discovery in the woods for disorderly conduct, and jail was where he was going to remain for the time being. All the investigators had to do was wait for the forensic evidence to pin down their culprit, and they would have their man. And that's exactly what they got. DNA evidence collected from the scene and from the victim's body placed David at the murder. But this open and shut case went from grotesque to downright wretched, almost as soon as David was brought in for questioning. Without hesitation, David confessed to killing Ricky, and then he dove into the chilling and disturbingly calculated details. Beaming full of pride, David told the investigators that he'd used a butcher knife like the one Michael Myers uses in Halloween to kill his victims. It looked like taking a life had been all a game to David. According to David himself, he approached Ricky that night and sensed an opportunity to put the over 20 knives he kept stashed away at home to the test. The plan was to lure Ricky back to his house with the promise of more drinks and kill him there. But as the two men approached each other, David had a change of heart. Fearing that the already drunk Ricky would smell a trap if David invited him back to his home when they had just only met, David then suggested that they should head into the woods to drink more wine instead. Ricky, being a good time, agreed. David would later say that everything that happened rested solely on Ricky's shoulders. Quote, "It was his fault. Why would anyone go drinking and go into the woods with someone that looks like me?" David was referring to the many facial tattoos he had at the time of the murder, one which reads Satan and is above his eyebrow. But he also had a split tongue that David would later proudly display in his mugshot. Out in the woods, Ricky and David continued to drink for a while, but a few drinks later and David got down to the real reason he'd invited Ricky out there. After inflicting 39 wounds and killing Ricky, David then turned to his attention to Ricky's neck. He slashed and cut, wanting to decapitate his victim. Quote, "I wanted to cut his dadgum head off. I just couldn't get through the bone." Wanting to decapitate Ricky was the closest that David ever came to giving a motive to his killing and why he chose Ricky in the first place, and it was a motive that everyone found more than lacking. Once David realized he wouldn't actually be able to follow through with his plans, he then changed tracks and tried to cover up his crime. He bound Ricky in ropes from neck to ankles to make dragging his remains around the forest easier, but even then he had a hard time of it. He first tried to take Ricky down to a nearby creek to dispose of him, but found that David was too drunk and had smoked too much dope to actually get the job done. The intoxicated David was then left trying to piece together some sort of plan because he wanted to keep that spot where they were in the woods available. He liked that patch of the woods, especially because he could see it from his own home, but he had a chilling reason to explain to the investigators why he was so protective of that particular spot. It turned out that David liked that bit of the woods so much because he knew that he wanted to kill there again. But if he ever wanted to achieve that gruesome goal, he knew he had to cover his tracks and get rid of the evidence first. He then came up with the idea of simply covering Ricky's remains with brush and leaves. Despite claiming to the investigators that he'd been too intoxicated to think straight, Ricky later was recorded talking to his mother from prison. In the call, he claims to remember every single detail of the killing because he never wanted to forget it. Realizing that this was his moment to go down in infamy, David Pate stole an opportunity to create a viral sensation during his new mugshot. With his face already covered in gang-related and satanic tattoos, he stuck his snake-like tongue out at the moment the picture was taken. Investigators would later say that it was one of the creepiest mugshots they'd ever seen. David, his crimes and his confession shocked the world, but not those closest to him. His brothers described him as the devil and claimed that he deserved everything that was coming to him in court and in prison. 2 years later, when David finally had his day in front of the judge, he took to the stand and pled guilty. All that was left for the judge to do was determine David's sentence. To try to push the judge toward giving a harsher sentence, the prosecution played the chilling footage of David's confession, footage that the judge cut off before finishing, saying that he and the court had seen enough. Smiling to the judge and the cameras, David seemed to enjoy hearing that he would be spending the rest of his life in jail. He even kept smiling when Ricky's brother, Antoine James, began yelling and berating him in court. David refused to turn around and face Antoine, so Antoine delivered his message to the back of David's head before leaving the courtroom. Quote, "I hope he suffers. I hate him. He is the definition of the devil." That's 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe. That's my name. I'm the host, and thank you for taking the time to listen to 10-Minute Murder. And if you're wondering, this episode came out on Friday. Today's Friday. If you're just listening to this and binging away, then that doesn't mean anything to you. But if you're listening to this on the day that it's out, it's Friday. Usually I release on Thursday. And the reason, you can probably tell why it was delayed, allergies have got me. I'm on the struggle bus. Yeah, yesterday and the day before, I was just leaking from my face, and I couldn't see the words on the screen to read my notes. My eyes were so blurry, and they were watery, and all the things that come along with allergies. I have allergies, and I've talked about it before. but the last few days have been like super duper worse than normal. I don't know why, but they were. Anyway, I appreciate your patience in this being released on Friday instead of a Thursday. If you'd like to get in touch with me, joe@10minutemurder.com, the website, 10minutemurder.com, and make sure you follow everywhere on social media that you can follow 10 Minute Murder. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. There's Twitter and there's Threads and all those ancillary social media places. But the main ones, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, those are the ones you're going to see the bulk of the content. Links are in the show notes, or you can go to 10minutemurder.com. And that's it. Thank you for listening to another episode. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.